The night was unusually still over the Massachusetts countryside, and a chill wind rolled through the narrow, cobbled streets of Boston. It was April 18, 1775. The moon hung low, veiled by thin wisps of cloud, casting a ghostly light over the harbor where British ships lay like dark beasts sleeping on the water. Inside a small wooden house on North Square, a silversmith named Paul Revere sat at his desk, polishing the last of his tools. He had been restless all day, his hands busy but his mind burning with one thought: a war was coming. Revere's heart had been pounding since the meeting at the Green Dragon Tavern earlier that evening. There, whispers had become plans, and plans had become destiny. Word had reached Boston that British troops of the regulars were preparing to march to Concord, a small town 20 miles inland, where the patriots had hidden weapons and powder. Worse still, they intended to arrest Samuel Adams and John Hancock, two men whose fiery voices had become the soul of rebellion. Revere had been waiting for this moment. As one of the Sons of Liberty, he had risked his life many times to deliver secret messages, smuggle gunpowder, and rally men to the cause. Tonight, though, was different. Tonight, he would have to outwit the entire British army. A faint knock at the door broke the silence. Revere opened it to see William Dawes, another messenger, his coat collar turned up against the cold. "They're moving," Dawes said in a low voice. "They're crossing the Charles boats, dozens of them." "It's begun." Revere didn't hesitate. He snatched his riding cloak and pistols from the peg by the door. "Then we ride," he said. He ran through the narrow alleyways of Boston toward the waterfront. There, in the shadows, two men waited with a small rowboat. "The lanterns," Revere whispered. "One if by land, two if by sea," one man replied. "Old North Church is ready. We'll light too." Revere looked up toward the steeple that pierced the sky like a watchful finger. Soon, two faint lights would gleam from that tower, a signal to patriots across the river that the British were coming by sea. It was the spark that would awaken an entire countryside. The boatman rowed him silently across the Charles River. The tide was high, and the water lapped cold against the hull. From the deck of one of the British ships, a guard's lantern swayed lazily in the wind. Revere held his breath, clutching the wooden side of the boat. If they were caught, it would mean imprisonment or worse. But luck was with them. The oars barely made a sound, and soon they reached the opposite bank at Charlestown. A horse was waiting there, a powerful brown mare, restless and stamping. Revere swung into the saddle, adjusted his cloak, and whispered to the men who had helped him across, "If I don't return, tell them the regulars are out." Then he spurred his horse into the night. The road stretched ahead, winding between stone fences and fields silvered by moonlight. The air smelled of damp earth and smoke. Revere's heart beat with the rhythm of the horses' hooves. Every shadow seemed alive, every tree a sentinel. He knew the danger of British patrols roamed these roads, and if they caught him, they would hang him as a traitor. As he neared the edge of Charlestown, a figure stepped from the darkness, musket glinting. "Halt! Who goes there?" the soldier barked. Revere's hand shot to his pistol. "A friend to liberty," he shouted, and with the hard pull of the reins, he turned sharply into a side path, galloping through a grove of birch trees. Musket fire cracked behind him, the shot echoing in the still night, but he didn't slow down. Branches lashed his face, and his breath came in gasps, but he pressed on until the sounds of pursuit faded. He reached Medford near midnight, his horse slick with sweat. He thundered up to a small house where the local militia captain, Isaac Hall, lived. Revere pounded on the door until it flew open. "The regulars are out," he shouted. "Up to arms!" Within minutes, the house was ablaze with candlelight. Men scrambled from their beds, loading muskets, pulling on boots. Bells began to ring in the distance, dogs barked, and the quiet village came alive with motion. Revere didn't wait to see Ida. He was already back in the saddle, racing toward Lexington. The road to Lexington was long and lonely, winding through open meadows and sleepy farms. Revere's horse moved like quiet itself, her hooves striking sparks from the stones. Every few miles, he stopped to rouse another patriot. At each house, his cry pierced the night, "Up, up, the regulars are coming out." Windows flew open, candles were lit, and one by one, the colonies awoke. By the time he reached Lexington, the church clock was striking 1. He saw lights burning in the parsonage where Samuel Adams and John Hancock were staying. 2 guards stood watch outside, startled to see a rider approach so fast. "Who goes there?" one called. "Paul Revere," he gasped, swinging down from his horse. "The regulars are coming to seize you both. You must leave at once." Inside, Hancock was already awake, his face grave but calm. "Then the time has come," he said. "We've been waiting for this." Adams placed a hand on Revere's shoulder. "You've done well, Paul. The Lord will remember this night." Revere stayed only long enough to make sure the 2 leaders were preparing to flee. Then he mounted again and prepared to ride farther west toward Concord, where the weapons were hidden. Along the way, he was joined by William Dawes, who had taken a different route out of Boston. "Thought I'd lost you," Dawes said, grinning despite the cold. "You'll have to ride faster than that if we're to beat the regulars," Revere replied. Not long after, another rider joined them, Dr. Samuel Prescott, a young patriot and son of a Concord doctor. He had been returning home after visiting his sweetheart when he met the 2 messengers on the road. "I'll ride with you," he said without hesitation. "I know every path from here to Concord." The 3 men rode together, their voices carrying in the night as they shouted the alarm from house to house. But near Lincoln, their luck ran out. From the shadows ahead, a group of mounted British officers suddenly appeared, blocking the road. "Halt, in the name of the king!" one officer barked. Revere's horse reared, and for a moment, chaos erupted. Dawes turned sharply and managed to escape down a side lane. Prescott, knowing the woods, leapt his horse over a low stone wall and vanished into the darkness. But Revere was surrounded. A pistol was thrust toward his chest. "Disarm him," one officer ordered. Revere raised his hands, his heart hammering. "If you value your lives," he said boldly, "you'd best let me go. The countryside is rising. Hundreds are already armed and waiting." The officer laughed coldly. A likely story. But the faint sound of distant bells and shouting drifted through the air, and the officer's expression changed. "Search him and take his horse," he commanded. They led Revere at gunpoint along the road, questioning him harshly. But Revere, though exhausted, met their interrogation with steady eyes. "You'll not stop them," he said. "Every village from here to Concord knows you're coming." Finally, perhaps fearing they were already surrounded, the officers released him. They kept his horse, though, and left him to make his way on foot back toward Lexington. The first faint light of dawn was beginning to show in the east when Revere stumbled back into the village. His clothes were torn, his face streaked with dirt and sweat. He found Adams and Hancock again, now being escorted to safety. Hancock gripped his hand. "You've done your duty, Paul. The country owes you more than you know." Revere nodded, too worried to speak. Together, they watched from a distance as the first shots of the revolution were fired on Lexington Green. The British troops, marching in perfect red-coated ranks, had met the local militia. For a moment, there was silence. Then came a single gunshot and no one knew who fired either, but it was enough to ignite the fury of both sides. Muskets cracked, smoke filled the air, and men fell to the ground. "The war has begun," Adams said softly. By mid-morning, the British soldiers pressed on toward Concord, but now the countryside was truly awake. From behind trees and stone walls, farmers and blacksmiths set ordinary men fired upon them. Revere, though unarmed, helped guide the wounded to safety. He saw with his own eyes the birth of something greater than rebellion. It was the birth of a nation. As the day wore on, the regulars were forced into retreat, harried all the way back to Boston by hundreds of determined colonists. The sun set red behind the hills, and the roads that had been empty the night before were now filled with men ready to fight for liberty. That evening, Revere sat by a campfire on the edge of a field. His hands trembled, not from fear but from exhaustion. Around him, men spoke in low voices, planning, remembering, grieving for the dead. He looked up at the sky, now calm and deep blue, and thought of how the stars seemed brighter than ever. He could still hear the echo of his horse's hooves in his men at the gallop through darkness, the wind on his face, the cries of awakening hounds. He hadn't fought that morning, he hadn't fired a shot, but his ride had carried the message that turned the scattered people into an army. In the years that followed, Paul Revere would return to his trade as a silversmith, and later serve as a soldier and industrialist. But that night, the night of April 18, 1775, would forever define him. He never thought of himself as a hero. To him, it was simple. A man had to do his duty when the time came. But history remembered. His midnight ride became legend, his warning cry echoing across centuries. The British are coming. Long after the war ended, Revere grew old in a free America, the very country whose birth he had witnessed that April dawn. Sometimes he would sit on his porch and watch the sun rise over the Charles River, the same river he had once crossed in silence and danger. He would think of the faces he'd seen that night, of William Dawes, Samuel Prescott, the sleeping farmers he had roused, the men who fell on Lexington Green, and he would smile faintly, knowing that their courage had not been in vain, because freedom, he had come to understand, was not born in grand speeches or declarations written on parchment. It was born in the heartbeat of one rider racing through the night, in the clatter of hooves on a lonely road, in the flame of a lantern shining from a church steeple. It was born when ordinary men and women chose to stand against the impossible, to fight for a future they could not yet see. And so, as the old silversmith watched the first light of dawn glint on the river, he whispered softly to himself, remembering that night when he had carried the spark of a nation on the wings of midnight. That spark had become a fire, and that fiery freedom's flame would never again be extinguished.